What the fuck is up, you buttercups? It's your boy, Penny Skeenness, and today's video subject is a little different than usual. Instead of commentary, we're gonna go into what would probably be classified as anime review edutainment. We're gonna be talking about Uzumaki. No, not that Uzumaki, a new horror anime that dropped a few weeks ago that has a lot of buzz around it. Not because it's good, but because it's pretty fucking bad. And this has nothing to do with the source material, but rather the animation, notably the heavy drop in quality from episode 1 to episode 2. But let's back up a bit. What is Uzumaki? I'm not the biggest fan of anime, more of a casual viewer. Same with manga. Last thing I probably read was the final season's worth of Attack on Titan, because holy shit, I got tired of waiting 4 years for them to animate 5 goddamn episodes. But even I've heard of Junji Ito, a very popular horror manga artist, who's already had things adapted into animes before, notably his collection of short horror stories that were turned into a Netflix anthology. Also this anime about fish that grow legs and start attacking everybody, which sounds fucking hilarious. To get back on track, Uzumaki is a manga from the late 90s that tells the story of a small fictional town plagued by supernatural curses involving spirals. Uzumaki translating to spiral or whirlpool, which is, fun fact, where Naruto Uzumaki gets his name. He is named after the Naruto whirlpools. In universe, he's basically named after a fish cake that also displays the little spiral pattern he has on his stomach. But unlike the kind-hearted and upbeat nature of Naruto, this Uzumaki is much darker, which is one of the reasons Junji Ito thought the idea worked so well. It takes a positive symbol in Japanese media and turns it into the dark, terrible force that's plaguing this town. Now, I hadn't heard of Uzumaki until after I saw the buzz after episode 2 dropped, and I pay for HBO Max, gotta watch my Boardwalk Empire somehow, so I said, what the hell, let me go watch it. And honestly, I was liking it. I was really enjoying it. I thought it was super fucking creepy, and I found it so interesting, I went and read the manga, which is only 20 chapters long. And overall, it's pretty fucked. 10 out of 10 would recommend. I'm going to be going through the 2 episodes released, as well as referencing the manga. So 2 notes. A, this falls under fair use. Fuck you. B, there will be spoilers. You have been warned. Let's get into this beautiful Jesus. Episode 1 opens with a girl walking down a mountainside. Her name is Kirie Goshima, but to avoid sounding like a Canadian, I'm just calling her Kiri, and she's our main character throughout Uzumaki. She lives in a town called Kurozucho, which according to the internet means Black Vortex Town. Do with that info what you will. We meet her boyfriend Suichi Saito at the train station. While walking home, Suichi discusses the idea of leaving the town together. He explains all the weird shit he's seen going on. Whirlwinds and whirlpools all over the place, and the fact his dad is going mad over his spiral obsession. Spending all day in his study staring at spirals, needing to spin his soup into a whirlpool to eat it, even needing his baths to be spun into a whirlpool. The creepiest of these things being that he can spin his eyes independently of each other, and will often do this while staring at his spirals. Like the relatable protagonist Kiri is, she too tries to spin her eyes independently like you just did watching this video. Suichi also makes note of the sinister lighthouse and walks off mumbling to himself. It's very obvious Kiri doesn't really know what the fuck is going on right now. So relatable, bestie. From this first few minutes, we can see the art style they're going for is very stylized, looking practically like a manga panel, including being completely black and white. And I honestly was really digging this style. The black and white made me feel like I was watching an old eerie horror movie like Night of the Living Dead or something. Kiri gets home and finds her boyfriend's father, Mr. Saito, talking to her father, who makes ceramics for a living. He wants to commission an art piece to fuel his spiral obsession, and goes on about how amazing spirals are. So far, minus a scene or two, the anime and manga have been pretty similar up to this point. The main difference we will see throughout the anime from this point on has to do with the order of events. The manga, which came out in chapters, usually tells a self-contained story of some creepy shit happening. The anime, however, takes these chapters and intertwines them together, touching on multiple beats in the story at the same time, which makes sense. The anime will only be 4 episodes long, meaning if they want any chance of adapting the 20 chapters, they have to move through the story at a faster pace, and mixing the events of chapters together is a solid way to accomplish this, though sometimes it can feel a bit jarring from scene to scene. And there are instances where context is missing or changed from the original source material that I feel takes away quite a bit. We now jump to later at school. Kiri is talking to her friend Azami Koritani, who has a crescent-shaped scar on her forehead from when she hurt herself as a kid. kid. She claims that ever since she got that scar, every boy she's ever liked has had a crush on her back. Both Kiri's boyfriend and Azami use the train station to get to and from school, so Kiri decides to introduce the two. Shuichi is immediately terrified of Azami and runs off with Kiri, telling her Azami is a spiral. We have no idea what that means, and so far, it just sounds like this dude could be as crazy as his dad. Later, Kiri is delivering the custom ceramic commission to Shuichi's father, though he says he doesn't need it anymore, because he's figured out how to make his own spirals. My reaction exactly, bestie. Kiri runs off just as another commission arrives, and we cut to Shuichi, who's been found by Azami in the streets. She's confused at why every guy she's ever known has been into her, but he isn't, and is now obsessed with him for that reason. Shuichi can sense something on her forehead, and as she starts explaining the scar, it's revealed to no longer be a crescent shape, but a spiral. Shuichi tells her she needs to get out of town or something bad will happen, before running off with the best fucking strut I've ever seen in all of anime. We then cut to Mr. Saito's funeral. The cover story as he fell down the stairs. In reality, he ordered a tub to cram into to make himself into a spiral, which is the state that his wife and son found him in. Dear God, there seems to have been an escalation. As he's cremated, the smoke in the sky begins to form into a spiral shape, which starts to settle into Dragonfly Pond. Shuichi's mother freaks out, claiming she can see his father in the smoke. One of the great shots in this anime. Look at that shit, fucking terrifying. This incident is the final straw that mentally breaks her, and as she's taken away in an ambulance and hospitalized, Azami shows up, and a whirlwind rolls by, revealing a massive fucking spiral-shaped hole in her forehead before she runs off. This whole reveal is perfectly done. It's definitely an unexpected escalation. The wind, the music, it truly is horrifying to see a spiral cavern in this girl's head with no explanation. We cut to school on a rainy day. Azami hasn't been showing up. Just as we think she's arrived, about to reveal another horrible development, we are instead greeted by a slime-covered child by the name of Katayama, who's shown up completely drenched and late to class. He apparently has only been showing up on rainy days as well. One of his classmates makes a joke about him being slower than a snail. Sometimes foreshadowing can be quite obvious. After losing volleyball because of how slow Katayama is, his classmates strip him in the locker room and drag him into the hall. When he rolls over, it's revealed he has a spiral-shaped pattern forming on his back, almost like a snail. At the hospital, Shuichi's mom has only gotten worse, shaving her head in fear of the spiral shape it makes, and even cutting off the tips of her fingers to get rid of the fingerprints. Later that night, Kiri runs into Azami and approaches her, worried that she hasn't been showing up to school. Azami says her eye isn't able to focus and asks Kiri to take a look. This is where we get one of the most terrifying images in all of Uzumaki. As Azami takes off her hat, it's revealed the spiral has gotten even larger, hollowing out most of her head and sucking one of her eyeballs into whatever type of otherworldly void is causing it. Kiri, like the base protagonist she is, freaks the fuck out. Valid. We cut to Shuichi in a park, brought there by one of Azami's admirers under false pretense. When he realizes Azami wants nothing to do with him, he snatches her hat off, revealing the entirety of her upper head engulfed by the spiral. When he gets too close, he is then sucked into her and basically vored. Shuichi calls out to Kiri, and they both watch in horror as Azami is completely consumed by the spiral, vanishing without a trace. And that is how the first episode ends. Now, looking at it in its entirety, there's a lot going on here, and it's pretty horrifying for the most part. What's worse is there's almost no rhyme or reason behind the incidents we've seen so far, nor any real way to connect them besides the spirals themselves. We can say what happened to Mr. Saito could represent the consuming nature of obsession, as his obsession to spirals drove him to madness. Maybe Azami could be said to embody that same obsession, though directed towards Shuichi instead of spirals. Azami was liked by every guy she's ever met, but wants none of them. She becomes obsessed with the one guy who doesn't feel the same way, and that obsession literally devours her. This theme is actually supported even more in the source material, where instead of meeting in a random alley, Azami shows up to Shuichi's house, breaks in, and has the conversation with him as he's cowering on the floor in the hallway. Azami also doesn't show up at the funeral because that was chapters beforehand, and she's not very polite with Kiri. She actually has a confrontation about her obsession over Shuichi. Now, as always, my 3 brain cells feel very confident about the words I'm saying right now. But then we get to Katayama. Katayama has absolutely absolutely nothing in common with the other two stories so far. His fate isn't complete, and we won't actually see his story conclude until episode 2. But so far, there's nothing of his story that correlates to the other two. For instance, he doesn't show any signs of obsession. You could maybe argue he has an obsession with rain, but if that were the case, why would he still be coming to school on rainy days instead of missing school to obsess over the rain? I already know the rain isn't an obsession, mainly because I finished the second episode, and I know what the purpose of the rain actually is, but we'll get to that. In the manga, Katayama's story is introduced and concluded in chapter 8, quite a bit later than a lot of what we've seen so far, as most of this first episode focused on Mr. Saito's spiral into madness, his death, and the aftermath of his funeral, which all take place in the first 2 chapters. It makes sense, those are the chronological events in the manga, but we're introduced to Katayama and don't really get to see the progression of his story at all, getting less than 2 minutes of runtime focused on it, basically just setting it up for the next episode. I feel like that's 2 minutes that could have been better spent completing Miss Saito's story, which we still haven't seen in the anime. One could say they threw in Katayama to help speed up the story progression by introducing the next thread sooner than later, which is fair, but I still feel like it could have been done better, and I'll show how after we get through the second episode. So far, I haven't had too many gripes with the animation, and with the simple shading style, it's actually pretty hard to tell when 3D is being used based off the lighting. Usually when 3D is used in animation, there's obvious shading differences because you're not going to be able to easily create 3D lighting that perfectly matches the not real and non-existent lighting accomplished by shading on a 2D image. Sometimes it's worse than others in anime, but other times it can add to the animation quite well. Originally, it was announced a company named Drive would be the animation team working on this show, but the credits for the first episode are to a company called Fugaku Inc. Looking into them, I couldn't really find any well-known projects they've worked on, and whenever they are listed on stuff, Drive is also listed, so there's probably some causation there, but I wouldn't know. I don't know shit about Japanese animation companies, but I did think overall the animation team on this episode did quite well. They did a great job capturing the essence of these terrifying manga panels. Too bad they got fired. No one knows exactly what the fuck happened, but when episode 2 dropped, people were appalled by the insane drop in quality. Uzumaki was announced to be in production back in 2019, with teasers being shown in early 2020. The original director said the COVID pandemic hadn't at all affected production, though he later admitted in an interview the pandemic did force the team to restructure their original plan entirely, with no details on what exactly that meant. He also announced the show would be delayed till October 2022, and it was delayed even further to late 2023, and finally actually dropped at the end of this September 2024. Over 5 years of production, being given hope with an amazing first episode, just for that hope to be smashed when episode 2 dropped. The executive producer for the show, Jason DeMarco, said in a now deleted social media post that he can't talk about what happened, but that they were, quote, screwed over, and that their options were A, not finish the show and air nothing, B, finish and air the first episode, leaving the show incomplete, or C, run all 4, warts and all. Obviously they chose option C, and dear God does it show. Compared to episode 1, we will be stopping a lot to admire the animation quality. Episode 2 opens on another rainy day. Katayama arrives late again, and this time he has some sort of spiral-shaped growth bulging out of his back. The massive decline in animation quality is already very noticeable. From a shot-to-shot comparison of the first episode, it's almost criminal how bad they butchered such a beautiful art style. Not to mention, Katayama's entire character is supposed to be slow. He's turning into a snail, very obviously by this point. Look at this motherfucker yapping, and some of these frames are just so jarringly different. Details are also just outright missing. There's not a drop of rain or slime on this kid. Like the base protagonist she is, Kiri laments the drop in quality before we cut to the title card, which I didn't mention in episode 1, mainly because I wanted to make fun of the fact you can recreate this effect pretty easily in Premiere Pro using the twirl effect. We cut to some rundown buildings known as row houses. 2 teenagers lay together inside. Their names are Kazunori and Yuriko. The two's loving embrace is interrupted by the sight of 2 snakes coiled together, like a spiral. The girl thinks they're fighting, like their parents always are, but the boy recognizes they are actually mating, before the snakes fall through a hole in the floor. We then cut to Kiri walking through the graveyard with one of her classmates, Shiho. Shiho notes that no one knows what happened to Azami, and that the town has started burying people again, due to everyone cremated causing the same spiral smoke pattern in the sky that happened at Mr. Saito's funeral. This scene suffers from what I like to call the popsicle stick effect. One of the worst cases of the popsicle stick effect I've seen in recent years comes from the cartoon Invincible. Overall, Invincible is a great show and has a very passable art style. Come to think of it, that show also got me to read the rest of the comics because it was so good. But during Mark Grayson's first flight in his new suit, there's a shot of him flying over a body of water next to a bridge. And oh my god, do you see what I mean? I can literally cut him out in Photoshop, tape a popsicle stick to him, and achieve the same effect. An anime can suffer from this same effect, but usually it's with close-up walking shots, because otherwise you'd actually have to draw legs doing things. Unfortunately, besides a few outliers, this is the best we can hope for in this entire episode. It only gets worse from here. While making their way to school in the graveyard, a kid pops out and jump scares the girls so badly, they completely freeze frame and fall to the floor, like a weakening fridge magnet sliding down the door. His name is Mitsuru Yamaguchi, and he tells Kiri that he's in love with her. And like the base protagonist Kiri is, she tells him to fuck off. Shiho says this is why everyone calls him Jack in the Box, and he says that's just what he does. He loves jumping out and scaring people. New scene. Kiri stumbles onto the two teenagers in a fight with Yuriko's father and brother, who, made obvious by the shoving, disapprove of their love. Kazunori takes the slowest right hook since the Sped games, the quality of which is so dubious, I'm probably in more pain than he is just having to watch it. Yuriko is dragged off by her family as Kiri goes to check on Kazunori. The two have a conversation about how twisted both his and his lover's families are. They both live in the same rundown row house, basically wall to wall, but hate each other as a way of coping with the poverty they both suffer. He has hope that him and Yuriko are not yet as twisted as their family are, and they plan to run away together by train the day after tomorrow. I don't feel like this lover's story is done as well as it is in the manga. We could have included more lines that explain exactly why the hate exists between the two families. Basically, they're both poor and both see each other as trash people. Why would you want your daughter dating a trash person's son? Obviously, this is very hypocritical, since they're both in poverty, both living in the same shacks, both jobless in the manga. They could have thrown in some lines where the brother called him poor or some shit before slapping him upside the head with that slow ass punch, but I digress. We cut to the hospital. Miss Saito is still not doing great, and Suichi and Kiri have a conversation about the two lovers. Suichi believes those row houses to be cursed by the spiral, and that anyone living in them will have their soul twisted. He thinks the spiral is slowly infecting the entire town, showing a random image of a dead kid, who I know from the manga fell off the school building, dying with a grim smile on his face. He also says Kiri's hair is getting longer, because how else are we going to transition into the next story thread? We cut to Kiri at school, and her hair has started to curl at the ends. Her classmate Kyoko offers to braid them, but later in class the braids undo themselves, and her hair curls back into spirals. At this same time, Katayama is seen crawling up the side of the building, almost completely transformed into a snail, with the only human features left being the rough shape of his head. Like the relatable protagonist Kiri is, she gets the fuck out of there right away. This scene is only slightly horrifying. It was definitely underwhelming due to the animation cuts, and we actually miss out on an entire stage of transformation in the manga, where Katayama crawls into class while still having arms and climbs into his seat. Though that would have been crazy to see, I think it does make more sense to drop the snail transformation on them as quickly as possible, because this scene would be even less interesting if we already saw him crawling into the room in snail form. Kiri heads to a salon to get her hair cut, and it fails miserably, with her hair starting to attack the stylist. Another main issue that's very prominent throughout the poor animation is there's sometimes an instant jump from one piece of animation to the next, with nothing connecting the two. For instance, the stylist is about to cut her hair, it's all curled up, then the next frame, there are no curls, and the hair starts to wrap itself around her. The entire episode is basically just one big continuity error, and we'll see more throughout. I'd also like to point out, this mirror is inconsistent as fuck. First off, it doesn't look mirrored at all, just a slightly different head. Second, the hair isn't the same. Why would you waste your time animating that when clearly there's much more to worry about? After going home, her hair tries to strangle her before hypnotizing her family. It also now stands straight up into the air, and later at school begins to hypnotize other people, and Kyoko becomes jealous of the attention she's getting. We get a scene where the bully who stripped Katayama seems quite into Kiri's hair. His name is Sumura, by the way, and Kiri goes to check on Katayama, who's being kept in a cage on the school grounds. She overhears the teacher trying to explain to Katayama's parents that their son is now a snail, and at this point he's lost all signs of humanity and is now completely a snail, and his parents don't believe he's their son, leaving him at the school. The next scene cuts to the kids leaving school, Sumura trailing behind everybody, looking quite slimy himself. Kiri heads to the train station, and while everyone is mesmerized by her hair, Suichi runs off like a goddamn goblin that needs to take a shit. New scene. Yamaguchi pops out of nowhere and gives Kiri a present as a token of his love. She rejects him, reiterating that she has a boyfriend. He responds like any normal person would and jumps in front of a moving vehicle, saying his love will stop the car. He is then run over off screen as Kiri just stares. No flinch or anything, she just like raw dogs that shit, like it's a staring contest or something. Yamaguchi dies lodged inside the wheel well of the car, still holding holding the present meant for Kiri, which opens up into a jack-in-the-box. We cut back to the school and see another snail crawling along the wall. At first, it's assumed to be Katayama, who must have escaped his cage. But upon closer inspection, the students realize that it's actually Sumura, who is also turned into a snail. They put him in the same cage as Katayama, and because snails are hermaphrodites, they begin to have passionate relations right there in front of everybody. Unlike in the manga, no one says shit about what they're witnessing, because we don't have time for that. We gotta move on to the next story beat. Kyoko shows up and also has crazy spiral hair. She says not only is she better than Kiri, but that there can only be one girl who's the center of attention. They get into a stale-ass Medusa hair fight until Suichi intervenes and cuts a lock of Kyoko's hair as it's trying to strangle Kiri, only to be engulfed by her hair after trying to cut it as well. Feeling like she's won the battle, Kyoko struts off into town, with the majority of this episode's budget being spent on her hip sway. Suichi cuts his way out of Kiri's hair, cutting off as much as possible. And while Kyoko struts through town, high off the attention she's getting from her spiral hair, she begins to look more and more drained. Suichi wakes up Kiri after cutting all her hair off, and they both overhear that the two snail kids have escaped. They follow the snail trail into the mountains and discover their teacher, Mr. Yokota, has found the snails have laid eggs. He starts to smash all of them, saying they'd caused the town to panic, and justifies the killing of their offspring by saying they aren't even human anymore. Because the pacing of this episode is breakneck, after seeing and hearing all this, Kiri then goes, "Oh yeah, those two kids were running away together. We gotta get over to the train station." It just feels so insane how quickly our characters just forget about the last thing that happened and move on to another plot point. And it's because those plot points we're moving to are from completely separate chapters that were originally self-contained. I felt like the pacing of the first episode was fine. The one thing I would change is either to finish up Miss Saito's story, which, spoiler alert, is her killing herself in the hospital, and or to end the Katayama bit with the first part we see in episode 2, letting us see the snail shell starting to form on his back. That small addition could have made Katayama feel less like an afterthought in the first episode. Despite that, the pacing in the first episode is fine, while the pacing in the second episode is way too damn fast and without solid ties to intertwine all the stories. At the train station, the two lovers show up, explaining they're being chased by their family, who spotted them sneaking out of the house. They decide to cut through the beach, even though the establishing shot showed they were already at the train station. By the way, I went back and checked, and yeah, this is an error. They were all going to meet up and then go to the train station, so this establishing shot shouldn't be here. This chase scene is where we get some of the worst animation in the entire episode. Every time these fuckers run, it gets worse and worse. Like a limping dog trying to reach the tree it plans on dying under. The animators are just giving up more and more each second that passes. And we still have 10 minutes left. And 2 entire episodes of apparently this quality or worse. God help us. They start running down the stairs to the beach, and we can see some perfectly drawn brick patterns someone accidentally laid on top of the stairs instead of behind them. It's just insane this made it into an actual anime. What the fuck? After another amazing chase scene, the couple falls after running about 15 feet. Kazunori gets another taste of that sped knuckle sandwich before taking a dive not even wrestling fans would buy. Not wanting to be separated again, the lovers instead decide to twist and contort their bodies together like the snakes they saw in the row house. The spiral's influence on their families have pushed them to twist their own bodies just as it's twisted their families' hearts. They explain that they'll now be together forever before slithering off into the ocean, never to be seen again. Oh, I lied, there they are. Oh, never mind, they're gone. This scene looked okay, but it's still very noticeable how much we missed out on due to the drop in animation quality. For instance, they twist their own bodies, they coil their hands together, but their bodies are still separated. We then cut to them completely coiled together, their heads being the only human aspect left throughout the middle of the coil. It would have been pretty horrifying to see that act animated. At least here, for these couple seconds, it looks like they tried to animate it, unlike the entire hair plot, which not only did we not see like any motion at all with their Medusa hair, as the chapter is called, but we don't even get to see Kyoko die, which is what happens. Her hair sucks the soul out of her and leaves her body tied to a telephone pole. This episode is also 27 minutes long, and we couldn't shove in that 15 to 20 seconds of her dying. We transition to a shot of the black lighthouse, abandoned for years, for some reason shining across the city, before cutting to day. As Kiri is walking down the street, she sees an old woman who says she's trying to get home, as she aimlessly walks in a circle. Because Kiri is a base protagonist, she looks just as confused as we'd expect. We see the same thing happen to a number of people in town, and in class, people are speculating about the lighthouse before the door opens, and Mr. Yokota, now transforming into a snail person, crawls into class. With that, the snail arc, as I will call it, is complete. The episode is now exactly the same length as the first, yet like the entrancing shape of the spiral, this shit refuses to stop. We cut to the beach. Men are talking about a ship that ran aground, which if you didn't know is sailor talk for ate shit. The crew were apparently seen walking in circles before falling overboard and drowning. The men also explained that 5 experts were sent to check out the lighthouse the night before, and no one knows what happened to them. Kiri's brother and some friends run into the lighthouse, and she follows after them. She climbs for what feels like forever before stumbling across 5 crispy corpses. After finding 2 of her brother's friends and sending them back down, she heads to the top of the lighthouse and finds her brother and one of his friends staring fearfully at the lighthouse's lens, which has somehow been warped and distorted into a spiral pattern. Kiri realizes the heat from the lens has to be what fried the workers who went to investigate it. As the sun sets over the horizon, the 3 of them frantically book it down the lighthouse, and when the beam kicks on, nameless boy number 3 trips and is burned alive. This might have been scary if we could actually see anything. The episode ends with Kiri and her brother tumbling down the stairs. That's it. That's just how the episode ends. The shot of the lighthouse's beam shining over the town. I know the reason we end exactly at this point is to try to make the final scene a cliffhanger, but in reality what actually happens is Kiri and her brother get out of the lighthouse with burns and end up in the hospital, which is actually the catalyst for the next couple chapters. We also get a teaser of the Jack-in-the-Box kid at the way end, which looked promising, but you already know they're gonna fuck it up bad. This episode fits in 5 different stories at once, which is a lot, and you can really feel it throughout. Compared to the first episode, which fit in 2 stories and threw a little bit of the snail chapter in, episode 2 is an entire mess, and is nowhere near as well written as the first was. To avoid content ID, which is the automated system on YouTube to check for copyrighted content, clips shown need to be less than 6 seconds, which means I need to cut things very carefully as to not be wrongfully copyright striked for my fair use video, but also to prevent the visuals from being too jarring for the viewer, like single frames being left in or something. For episode 2, this was extremely hard to do, not only because it already felt jarring since continuity is non-existent from cut to cut, but because I shit you not, almost no actual piece of animation throughout the entire episode is even 6 seconds long, and therefore I had to mess with the speed to get shit to even reach 4 seconds sometimes. Because of the editing style required to review this show, I cannot visually describe to you the whiplash felt when actually watching it, because to do so I'd have to show you 10 seconds unedited, in which we'd get through 4 different cuts of animation that do not line up, before I'm promptly banned off the platform. When looking at the different curse stories throughout the episode, we can see a few patterns in how they could relate, with the main link connecting all of them still being the motif of spirals. For the snail story, whatever happened to Katayama spread to Sumura, which then spread to their teacher Mr. Yokota. The transformation into a snail indicates a complete loss of humanity, and while I still have no idea how or why the fuck Katayama first transformed into a snail, we could maybe say the reason the other 2 did is because of their inhumane treatment of others around them. Sumura was a bully, not only humiliating Katayama in human form, but making fun of him even after he transformed, and the manga directly saying he doesn't care because Katayama isn't human anymore. Mr. Yokota, upon finding the snail's eggs, destroys all of them, justifying it by saying the snails aren't even human. This dehumanization could have been the start of their loss of humanity that caused them to turn into snails as well. The lover's story seems to have more to do with the row houses than anything else, as they appear to be a source or an amplifier of the spiral curse. While it manifested in the attitudes and behaviors of the lovers' families, it manifested physically in them. The hair, I have no idea why the fuck it started, but Kyoko is consumed with jealousy over the attention Kiri's getting, jealousy being a type of obsession, and ultimately, she is killed by the thing she needed to gain and keep all that attention, the hair literally draining the life out of her. Some people speculate that this chapter had something to do with Japanese beauty standards or the Japanese fat tax. I don't know shit about Japanese beauty standards, and the fat tax wasn't implemented till 10 years after this was written, so we're just gonna move on. The Jack-in-the-Box kid can also be read as another obsession story, Kiri being the thing he's obsessed with, and that obsession leading him to his death. His story isn't finished yet, but we can already see the themes lining up, and something to do with Jack-in-the-Boxes, maybe the spiral motif being the springs they sit atop. The Black Lighthouse doesn't necessarily fit with any of the other stories, and is more so a device to further along other plots. The rays it shines upon the town is what causes people in this episode to start walking in circles, and in later chapters, do some other fuck shit. In the grand scheme of things, like Suichi's father or Izami, the lighthouse is less important than the story it furthers, that being the downward spiral of the town. Overall, do I like the show so far? Yes. But me liking the show is not indicative of the show being good. I like a lot of bad things because they are bad. One of my favorite video games is a 2011 zombie game called Dead Island, and I plan to do an entire video on it in the future. But the reason I like it is not because it's a good game. It's a bad game that's aged very poorly, but has a lot of interesting history to it, and because it walked one of my other favorite games, Dying Light, light was able to run, because the developers saw the flaws in their original attempt and improved on it dramatically. The reason I like Uzumaki is because the show is doomed to fail, which is sad, but in a beautiful way. The source material is great. The ending left me sitting there wondering what the fuck I'd just read. And the first episode showed promise that we'd see an adaptation of the horrifying story in a way that did it justice. And now after episode 2, we are left with the same feeling as losing our footing on the edge of a cliff. Our fate is already sealed. All there is to do is use our final moments to wonder how we got to this point and how it's going to end. In a way, the failure of the show is like the body horror in Junji Ito's Uzumaki itself. As disturbing as it is to see, I just can't look away. There are 2 more episodes of this show. One came out today and the other will come out next week. Since this video is already quite long and I think a 2 and 2 split would be a good way to break things down, after episode 4 drops, I'll make a part 2 where I can also talk about the ending and compare what the anime and manga do differently. I also have no idea if this has anything to do with the spiral theme, but episode 1 is 23 minutes long, episode 2 is 28 minutes long, and episode 3 is 29 minutes long. Maybe episode 4 will be even longer. Who knows? I'd hope so, because otherwise, we are going to miss out on a lot of the endgame story, bad animation or not. Thank you to everyone for watching. Don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed. Let me know if you interpreted anything differently or have your own theories, and remember, I am living in your walls.